So again, yesterday we talked about how communities can get prepared for either enhanced or new passenger rail service. And today we're focusing with that level setting that we just heard from our Corridor ID project team. Today we're diving into kind of the broader scheme of things, not just at the community level, but from a policy standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, from a rail operations standpoint. What can we do to really make this corridor a showcase for innovation, for creativity? Because make no mistake about it, what we're trying to do here is not just replicate your last worst experience on a train somewhere. We're trying to set the bar high and do it in a way that really makes for an example for all long distance passenger rail routes in the United States in the 21st century. So with that, I would like to introduce Sean Jeans-Gail with the Rail Passengers Association, and invite back up also John Robert Smith with Transportation for America to provide a policy briefing for us.
Good morning. Like I said yesterday, you have to bring more energy to what we're doing here today. Good morning. All right. So it's good to be back with you today. And if you want to arrive at a place you have defined as winning your issue, then you need to understand how you got to where you are today. And so I want to start with a level setting of where we were in 2013 at the national level. The Surface Transportation Authorization Bill that was coming up for reauthorization in 2015 was only for highways and transit. Passenger rail had never been in the Surface Transportation Bill before. So you cannot possibly articulate a vision for a transportation entity if it's not in the bill that governs the authorization of that kind of transportation. You did have Tiger Grant programs, and you could apply for a Tiger Grant to plan this corridor, for example, but you will be competing with highways, aviation, trucking, freight rail, ports. Every form of transportation competes for the Tiger Grants, which became raised, it became build again. So your odds of pulling off one of those grants in that competition is very small. And if you do that, it still doesn't get you anywhere after you have completed the grant, because there's no other framework for building out passenger rail. In that year, there were no earmarks. Remember, we had loved earmarks, and all of a sudden they were verboten. You couldn't have any earmarks. Congress was entirely too pure and high-minded to have earmarks. They have seen the error of their ways. And Congress said no new programs. So in 2013, the Southern Rail Commission decided they were going to cease being an eating and drinking society and once again become a dynamic force for passenger rail. And they said, we want to run a train. Success is running a train. It's not gathering, it's not discussing, it's ultimately running a train. So after some fits and starts, which Knox may allude to, they hired Transportation for America, and they said, okay, here's the lay of the land. We want to run a train. Well, fortunately, Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi was chairman of the Commerce Committee. and working with Senator Wicker's Commerce Committee in 2015, passenger rail was in the Surface Transportation Authorization Bill, and it has been there ever since. We created the CRISI program, Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program. It's called a consolidated program so that it doesn't qualify as a new program. So we consolidated several existing programs into one, and then we embellished the hell out of it and provided access for funding to build out infrastructure for passenger rail and short lines. And then we created the Restoration and Enhancement Grant, because working with Senator Wicker, you've got to answer two questions. How do you invest in the infrastructure? And then how do you provide operating support? Our premise was that most, if not all, of the state-supported trains at the time had one time been federally supported. So they had years of building up their ridership, their revenue models. Let's create the Restoration Enhancement Grant to give that glide path, which is now 6 years of operating support at the federal level. Then we also snuck into this bill, the creation of the Gulf Coast Working Group to answer the question that was being asked all across the Gulf: how do we get our train back? So with those things in place, then in 2016, we ran the inspection train because Amtrak didn't want to run this train. They could have restarted it at any time. They didn't want to do that. But Senator Wicker said, let's run an inspection train, which Amtrak did and CSX did, see what the track's like, see what the possibilities are. And of course, we generated the enthusiasm along the route that gave Senator Wicker and others the understanding of the importance and the courage to step out and really change the landscape of the federal program. And in 2017, that Gulf Coast Working Group report came back and said, yes, this makes sense, and this is what we ought to be engaged in as a nation. So as I said, in the FAST Act, for the first time, Amtrak's there, CRISI and the R&E grant is there. And I want look at the bipartisanship here. It's Senator Wicker, conservative Republican from Mississippi. It's Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat from Washington State, and Republican Bill Schuster in the House T&I Committee from Pennsylvania. Then in IIJA, the CIDP, Corridor Identification and Development Program, was created. Your corridor fits under it as an expansion of long distance. And the Interstate Rail Compact was created. All of these things were created basically out of whole cloth to fill gaps we found in the existing law. And the IRC is modeled off of the Southern Rail Commission. And again, now Senator Cantwell's chair, Senator Wicker's staff worked heavily with this, and DeFazio from Oregon on the House side. So it's been very bipartisan. And just so you'll know, the Surface Transportation Board has created the Passenger Rail Advisory Committee, 18 members. Jim Matthews serves on the board as well as I do. And then you can see there freight representatives there. There are state-supported operators there. It's a very good mix, and it's designed to bring back to the STB things that they can do in their own power to move towards the implementation of more passenger rail and to remove the roadblocks that come up every time we try to do this work. And then there will be recommendations that will take congressional action too, and some of those Sean's going to be addressing. And basically, what we'll spend the rest of the time talking about and answering questions is you have to have stable funding. You know, right now, passenger rail lives on an appropriations year-to-year basis. We've got to change that. Keep in mind that there is no form of transportation on the planet that carries a human being that pays for itself out of the fare box, period. You know, aviation, I flew out here. If my ticket had to cover the air traffic control system, the TSA agents, build airports, build the runways. You couldn't have afforded to fly me out here. When you back out of your driveway, you're on someone else's infrastructure. Do you know the trust fund by 2030 will have had $300 billion of general fund money put into the highway trust fund? So let's get over it. Every nation on the face of the earth invests in their transportation network, period. So let's get past that. We need stable federal funding for passenger rail in particular. We need to provide choice for those who want to have a new service. Choice is a good thing. We'll get better contracts, we'll get better service, and I think providers will become better entities. We have to have a national equipment pool. Elaine could tell you they don't have a car anywhere in the country to spare. Knox is going to tell you that they are maxing out the little train set on the Gulf, and that's before you ever get to Mardi Gras or anything else. They don't have, you'd have to put a flat car with folding chairs on to carry any more people. You don't have the equipment. We need a national equipment pool, and we have recommendations there. Create a working group for the long distance expansion, like we had a working group for the Gulf. And then speed project delivery. Lord knows it takes too long to get a project out. And we think we have ways to speed up the CIDP process in step 2, and then increased federal planning capacity so that you don't have to figure this all out on your dime. So, Sean?
Perfect. Thanks, John Robert. Appreciate it. Hello, my name is Sean Jeans-Gail, and I'm head of the Government Affairs and Policy team for the Rail Passengers Association. This is my third reauthorization cycle. You know, we represent the users of the network. We're more than 50 years old as an organization, and I think it's worth kind of re-emphasizing and foot stomping what John Robert said about how this has been an iterative process for federal rail policy. This is going to be my third or fourth reauthorization cycle in my time in the rail industry, and this is the healthiest ecosystem of kind of stakeholders I've seen, and I think it's a testament to what happens when you invest $60 billion more or less from the federal coffers into an industry. So we're looking to build on that success and make sure that you all as advocates, as people who are trying to bring service and upgrade service in your community, have the tools you need. One of the things we've already kind of talked about, and it gets to the question we had from the audience, is our idea for a national equipment pool. We looked at some best practices from international peer countries, and we saw that in Europe and in Asia, you have manufacturers actually coming in and saying, we know there's going to be this robust system of operators. We know there's going to be a need for equipment. So we're going to just, on our own dime, produce a bunch of equipment, standard spec, and we're going to lease it out to operators across Europe. Siemens created its own subsidiary in Germany. They're starting in Germany and expanding to other European countries. And we think there's a real need for that in the US. I think one of the things that has not been mentioned is for all the procurement efforts that Amtrak is currently engaged in. They have some Siemens Arrows coming for the state-supported routes. They are about to sign a contract for the long distance refleeting. These are essentially replacement efforts. They're looking at the equipment that's old, that's run down, that needs to be replaced, but we're not talking about really expanding the number of rail cars that we have. So if we have a new route like the like what we're talking about today through southern Montana, we don't know where that equipment's going to come from. So if we had a entity set up by the government, the federal government, to come in and make a bulk purchase of some equipment, look in conversation with Amtrak, in conversation with states and the manufacturers, look at what is currently being built and kind of piggyback on those manufacturing lines. We think it's a great way to build that pool for the next generation of routes that are currently being discussed across the U.S. The other thing is it's good for American manufacturing, which is a point of emphasis for this administration and for, I think, it's a bipartisan point of agreement. We have heard from manufacturers that, you know, when they're building, I think the next gen of Celis is a great example. Some of those suppliers have already gone out of business because they came from abroad, they invested in their domestic manufacturing footprints, they're part of the supply chain, but then they looked at when the next order is coming and there's no defined next order. And so they said, you know, we're gonna fold up shop because we need that predictability. And we think the national equipment pool can provide that, so we can go from those 3-car train sets back to what we used to have, because the demand is there. We are also proposing a long distance working group. This is modeled on the Gulf Coast working group, which we think is a good model for success. I think it kind of gets to the question you had, which is how can I, as a local advocate, support these efforts? It is important to have passion. It's important for you all to reach out to your members of Congress and say, we support rail programs, we support this specific project, but we shouldn't really have to do this every single year. We shouldn't have to defend passenger rail as a concept every time it comes up before appropriators, every time we reach the next stage of development in a corridor development process. So we think there needs to be a federal voice, a national voice that can convene together the FRA, host railroads, local government, labor advocates like us, and ensure that there's professionalism, that there is an entity out there that is creating a pipeline of projects that is engaging all the stakeholders in the service development plan and prioritizing routes that are ready to go. Because there was 15 routes identified in the FRA long distance daily service and restoration study. We don't have the capacity to move all of those at the same time, but we do, I think, need to take the next step and make sure that study just doesn't sit on the shelf and gather dust. I think that's the other big thing is we need to do all this faster. And I think there is a general consensus, not just in the rail industry, but in, I think, civil engineering in the US writ large, that things take too long to build in the US. I think we have gotten very defensive, in a very defensive crouch, where we do a lot of planning and environmental reviews and permitting with an eye towards heading off some hypothetical lawsuit coming down the future. And it's resulted in these really unrealistic timelines for developing corridors. The FRA assumed a 15+ year timeline as part of its FRA long distance service study. We built a transcontinental railroad in I think 6 years in the 1800s. So this is something we can do faster. We do it faster, frankly, when there is any sort of infrastructure emergency. We saw a fire take out a freeway in Pennsylvania outside Philadelphia. There was a number of steps that the governor took, instituting shot clocks on some of the permitting and review processes, because they said, this is an active right of way. Let's just build it. We think we can bring some of that to the rail process to really compress that 5 to 6 year preliminary engineering and environmental impact statement review process, get that down to around 3 years, and speed implementation. And that's going to be really, I think, important when you look at the political superstructure, because if you're having 15+ year implementation timelines, just think about how many administrations that is. Think about how many local mayors are you going to cycle through, and how you're going to have to stitch together that that political coalition again and again. And when you're looking at an eight state corridor, that's a hard bar to clear. Finally, we'd like to see some greater planning capacity at the federal level, so that groups like the Big Sky Rail Authority could come and use the FRA and work in conjunction with the FRA to really speed up some of the design and engineering. I think we see this a lot in other modes where we're not expected to recreate that planning capacity across all 48 continental lower US states. And so we want to empower FRA staffers to really facilitate that corridor development, and not just, I think right now there can be a tendency for the FRA to look at themselves as kind of bank loan managers, where they don't want to issue a bad loan to a state, and so they really run them through their due diligence. And if you look at something like the highway department, they're really out there trying to build the network out, and that's part of their mission, and that's what they're empowered to do. So I'll stop there and turn it over for questions. I'm not sure if you want to add anything on.
Well, just to say, understand that we're actually developing language now. We're almost there on the equipment pool language. And Rail Passenger Association, T4A, and others are working in tandem to make that happen. I know there are some rail suppliers here in the room. We'd love to have your thoughts about that. We understand that you have to have a stream of orders coming in. There has to be a pipeline of orders. You can't do what we've done in this country, ramp up, build a few cars, and then it's another decade before we even think about building any more trains. So we need that pipeline, and therefore there has to be a federal partner pushing dollars into that pipeline because the demand is there. So we'd love to have your thoughts and your comments about the very detailed language we have put together to make just that one component piece work. And where the PRAC is getting into the issue of indemnification and insurance for an additional provider. Amtrak brings that, but if there's going to be choice, then and Amtrak can't fulfill all of the routes that are being asked for in the country. So are there other providers? And if so, how do they get access to equipment? And then how do they get the similar indemnification so that the freights, that's a huge stopper for the freight. So there's ongoing work. Some of it is very detailed and ready to go to Commerce Committee. Other is not quite ready for Commerce, but will be very shortly, because once they get untracked, Commerce will work very hard. And we're seeing that there's agreement on the Democrat committee and the Republican committee looking at these very things. So questions?
Yes, hi. Again, my name's Frank Letterly from Quantal Consultants, and I just wanted to respond to your thought about the long distance committee or working group. Yeah, when I was at FRA, I was one of the project managers for the long distance study, and I just want to comment that one of the significant weaknesses of that study is that the mandate was to come up with long distance routes. But to me, if you look at that study and you look at the information, it's more important to take a look at what we call the enhanced network. Who are you going to serve? Now, the routes, ultimately what happened is that, we developed this enhanced network to make sure that we were covering 48 states, that we were covering areas that were underserved, that we were creating a network and not just a Chicago-based hub and spoke system. So when we put together the routes, it was really just how are we going to make sure that every one of these links are on a route somewhere? Because I'm not sure that it necessarily makes sense for Amtrak to operate the routes that were described. The important thing, I think, when you look at your working group is to think about making sure that you are serving areas like this, for example, that are underserved. They're called long distance trains, but they're not long distance riders necessarily. You know, I think we only have about 10% of the people riding the Empire Builder actually go from Chicago to Seattle. So it's a long distance train, but there are a lot of short distance trips along those. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, well, and that's true on every long distance train. Unfortunately, a previous Amtrak president, who should go unnamed, said, why in the world are we running the Southwest Chief? Only 10% of the people that ride it, no, 2% of the people that ride it go all the way. And I said, the reason we're running it is for those other 98% that get on and off. You know, this is not an airplane. He was an airplane exec. You know, we can actually get off this contraption when we get to a station we want to get off. So your point's very well taken, but that's true on every long distance train. So there are 15 out there. Some of them don't take into account the topography between point A and point B. You know, there's the Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta. But you got the Smoky Mountains in the way. There, you've got issues that you've got to address. We think there are, what, 4 or 5 that could move really quickly. This is one of them. So
750 miles long.
yep. Yeah, and there are enhancements to the already existing long distance network that pick up more riders, more revenue, that expansion doesn't have to be another 750 miles. It just keys in. Of course, I'm thinking of the I-20 corridor in particular, but so that kind of, let's narrow this down now to those that we can get after and actually make happen in our lifetime.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Malsky. I'm the founder of Spring Railroad Recruiting, as well as Here, an educational nonprofit started just last year. So all these visionary points that we have for enhancement, is there currently a legislative vessel that we have that we're pushing forward, or are these all going to be individual kind of?
Reauthorization. So the way Congress works, when it works, is you have an authorization bill that then tells the appropriators, here's what you can go find money to do. If it's not authorized, it's not appropriated. So the first thing is the authorization. Now, Congress generally kicks that can down the road. I mean, if they hit the authorization deadline, it'll be a miracle. But that's okay. It's a process that unflows. So all of these things now need to be pushed into that authorization bill. Well,
I can chime in
yeah.
there. We had a conversation with the authorizing committee on the Senate side last Friday. They said they are just kicking off this process. They're asking individual Senate offices to contribute their ideas by September 19th, which I think is going to be a I would say a straw poll to figure out what is a point of emphasis for the current makeup of the committee. Then we should have already had some hearings on this. They've been busy with the tax bill that just got passed. So I'm expecting that we will see some introductory conversations around these topics in both the House and the Senate. We're a little bit behind, and we're probably going to have to do a short-term extension. But it is important that we can't miss that first proposal. You know, we don't want to be left out of the 1.0 version because it's going to be a lot harder to get in on the second go around.
Trying to catch up after it's not included is a problem, but so you'll know, Dave submitted the Big Skies priority to senators, his senators, to then send in. So it has to come from a senator. T4A is sending ours out and the SRCs out to every senator we work with, both sides of the aisle. Those senators then hopefully put them into the Commerce Committee, and that's how this works.
And John Robert, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, is AAR and others backing the same proposals? Some they would be backing, some not. Yeah, I don't know that you could say that the freights are jumping up and down to provide more passenger rail service, but.
Hi, Mayor, thank you for being here, and your colleague. These are really excellent proposals. I'm very impressed, particularly, my name is John McIntosh, all aboard Washington. I'm the new treasurer. And I like the shot clock proposal for environmental regulation. That's inspired. I retired from Washington State Fish and Wildlife, and I know the environmental planning process is being abused, especially when you're putting additional infrastructure on a longstanding existing corridor. I have a comment and a proposal. You mentioned a need for stable level of funding, and I wrote a proposal for a federal excise tax on diesel fuel used by the railroads. A lot of people don't realize this, but the railroads use almost as much diesel fuel as the U.S. Navy. According to AAR, they used 3.2 billion gallons of diesel fuel in 2023. A excise tax on that would be proposed to create a passenger trust fund similar to the highway and airline trust fund models. It's a controversial proposal. Our board hasn't endorsed it. It might be kryptonite. I'm sure the AAR will put me on their bad list. The second comment I'd like to make is consideration of establishing a Amtrak National Academy patterned after the Merchant Marine or the Coast Guard or service academies to develop esprit de corps and professionalization of Amtrak crews. I think that's something that we should look at because there's a real need for new staff, training new staff, and I think it might work.
Well, and the good thing is, and Elaine saw this firsthand when she rode the launch, Claude, who was on board, sir, absolutely the best on-board service attendant in the whole system. Amtrak has employees already there that have served decades that could be wholly owned within inside of Amtrak, that academy of teaching others how to take care of human beings on board and how to, well, again, Knox is going to talk about the success of the customer satisfaction on the Gulf, but it's because of those people on the train that are serving the human beings that ride the train. So I don't know that we need to create an entity at the federal level. I think Amtrak can create it from within with the super people they have. Let them teach. Claude's not going to be wanting to climb those steps and jump on and off for much longer, but he could be the lead in that kind of instruction.
So we have just a few minutes left before we need to move on to the next session, but I think we have an online question or comment. Gregory.
Yes, Barry Green would like to know, how are we going to get Congress to listen to us when it comes to investing in passenger rail when most of the oxygen is being taken out of the room by DOT Secretary Duffy requesting billions to build a brand new ATC system across the country?
Sean, you go first.
Okay, one of you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do both. I mean, Secretary Duffy's got a lot of things on his plate. He's also in charge of putting a nuclear reactor on the moon. And we're just going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. The only thing I can say is we do need a new ATC system. Congress has been dragging their feet on that for a while.
And Sean, could you define for folks ATC?
Air traffic control.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, we've seen a number of incidents over the last year that highlight that. But just to reiterate, this is the healthiest I've seen the passenger rail ecosystem in my 15 plus years in the rail industry. And it's because of things like the FRA long distance service report. It's because there are currently a number of procurement efforts ongoing that are keeping that manufacturing base domestically alive. It's because of the work that, Big Sky and Abe and this team are doing to develop it. So there actually is work being done, and it's not going to be easy. I think a lot of members of Congress are going to look at the infrastructure bill and the 66 billion in rail and say that was a one-time thing. We didn't expect to do that again. But that's not what we do for highways. That's not what we do for airports, and it shouldn't be what we do for rail either.
Well, it's the members of Congress exposure. The only reason we have an air traffic control system in this country, we didn't have one in the past. 2 passenger planes flew into each other over the Grand Canyon. I am told there are still parts of them in the bottom of the canyon still today. Well, members of Congress fly. So they said, whoa, we got to solve this. I fly home. I don't want to wind up in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So they created the air traffic control system. They drive, so they all understand highways. They don't ride the trains. Now, you get them on and they understand it. That's how Lot became a champion.
Yeah.
By taking him on the train and letting him experience it. And then he calls Amtrak's president, Tom Downs, and says, I didn't know I cared about Amtrak, but apparently I do. What do I need to do to save it? So it's exposing them, and that's where you come in. And you've got to give it a real face. And they have to hear it in their offices in Washington, as well as when they're in their home district or their home state. You make it, you got to take it from theory down to real human experience.
We have time for one final question. Dan?
Big Sky Rail is encouraging local communities to plan connecting services in conjunction with the route, so the route is more successful in terms of ridership. Number 2, we put in our reauthorization principles a reduced match for transit systems that connect to and connecting services that connect to a long distance route. How can we get, this is the question, how can we get at the federal level the FRA, if they have greater planning capacity, to also talk with the FTA, the Federal Transit Association, and be geared to planning the connecting services with routes and enhancing connecting services to existing routes? How can we get that kind of coordination? Because that is ridership, that is benefit cost analysis improvement.
Well, I am told that you will shortly hear from Secretary Duffy that he wants to create a one DOT and break down the silos between FAA, Federal Highway, Federal Rail, all of them, so that you actually begin to plan these things and execute in unison. He has expressed to his staff, why do we have so many different funding programs and they don't seem to align or match up necessarily? One DOT can be a really, really good, strong step. Now, the details are in how you do that and don't lose any of the vibrant programs that you want to be a part of it. But if that's an initiative at the secretary's level, then Dan, there's an easy way for you to take that forward. In fact, we're working with Monroe, Louisiana. The mayor doesn't know it yet, but on what could be a demonstration project, because of the development coming to Monroe, 7,000, I think, new jobs. Aviation can't solve it from data. It's just simply aren't enough gate stops to make that work. So he's got to have a transit, rail, highway, and aviation solution, and we want to pitch that as a first demonstration project, hopefully under this one DOT. And I just want to say this about RPA. It is unfair to call them just an advocacy organization. They're much beyond that. Yes, they bring that voice, but they also bring the willingness to use their considerable policy knowledge they've learned over these 15 years and to work with others, freights, manufacturers, whomever. RPA has had a major shift in how they engage at the national level. And I just want to salute that change. And it's so nice to have a equal partner that comes in and rolls up their sleeves and gets to writing the language along with us. Thank you.
Let's give these gentlemen a hand. So why don't we take just a quick, like 5-minute break, which will allow our next panel to get on stage. And if you need to stretch your legs ever so briefly, fill up with coffee, please do so. And on each of your tables, you will have seen appear a sheet of paper with a QR code. Please scan that, because if folks are looking for something to do, some way to engage your elected officials at the federal level, we have some guidelines and some suggestions for you if you follow that QR code.